All right. Since we're here in the main room, I'm Brecken Winters from NRCDV, and I am so excited to welcome you to breakout session A, which is Elevating Community-Based Solutions, Alternative Forms of Safety and Justice. We do have ASL and Spanish interpretation available for this session, so be sure to select your language channel using the globe icon at the bottom of your screen if you haven't already. I'd also like to offer a reminder to please limit the use of the chat in order to keep things as accessible as possible for screen readers throughout this session. Well, while everyone's here, you get to hear me welcome our two speakers for session A. First of which is Joyce Kyles. Joyce is an award-winning international facilitator, speaker, two-time Amazon best-selling author, community advocate, and certified life and thriving skills coach. She is the founder and CEO of Walking into a New Life, Inc., and CEO of Joyce Kyles Consulting, LLC. Joyce has received certifications in the areas of domestic violence, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and mental health. A proud wife, mother, and Mimi, Joyce is a member of the Junior League of Memphis and a board member for the Memphis and Shelby County Domestic and Sexual Violence Council. Welcome, Joyce. Our other speaker for this session is Karima Dillard. Karima is the Director of Policy and Community Engagement for the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Karima's primary focus is to provide oversight, direction, and leadership in all anti-oppression initiatives in order to support survivors of domestic and intimate partner violence from marginalized communities in receiving services that are culturally responsive, appropriate, and safe. Karima also advocates for local and federal policies that strengthen protections and improve conditions for survivors across the state of Georgia. Karima is a board-certified drama therapist and a social worker and lives in Atlanta with her wife and lots of plants. Welcome, Joyce and Karima. You have the floor.
Good day, everybody. Joyce, it's so good to see your face.
I know, likewise.
It's so great to be here together. So I'm hoping that everybody who is here is meant to be here. And we just really appreciate you all for joining us today. As we get started here, I'd like to take a moment and pay homage to not just the land and our ancestors. It is very cold here in Hotlanta today, so I'm feeling, I have lots of feelings about the land today, but also to pay homage to folks in community who have been lifting up community work for a very long time. Folks doing transformative and restorative justice work, folks in Indigenous communities, folks like Miriam Kaba and Mimi Kim, Beth Ritchie, the candy lady in the neighborhood, the dads and the aunts and the uncles who were the de facto coaches for the kids in the neighborhood, the nosy neighbor, the church mother, you know, all of those folks have kept us safe for a really long time, and their efforts should not be overlooked. So we're gonna have a conversation today. So Joyce and I were talking about how we'd like to structure our discussion today. And one of the things that came to mind, I feel like I presence Audre Lorde a lot. Her speech that she gave on the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house has resonated with me for my entire adult life. So when I think about master's tools, and the irony is not lost on me that we are on Zoom here, but Joyce and I decided that we didn't really want to do a presentation. We didn't want to do a PowerPoint. We want to connect heart to heart, mind to mind, spirit to spirit in humanity and have a conversation about community alternatives. So We are going to be asking you all to engage with us as we have this discussion. You can come off mute and participate. You can put your thoughts in the chat, but we really want this to be conversational. So Joyce, I guess I could just go ahead and talk about how I entered this work unless you'd like to start. It's fine with me, however.
Go right ahead, and I'll just piggyback off of you.
Okay. So I'm Karima, and I have been doing DV work only for the last 6 years. But it's been in the last year that I joined the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence as the policy director. It happened to also be during the time of the beginnings of a racial reckoning that was happening in our country. And as a matter of fact, when I joined GCADV, I was moving from Southeast Atlanta to West Midtown, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from Buckhead. And it was during the same weekend that the Atlanta uprising happened, and the Wendy's was burned, and lots of community folks came out and protest. It was the exact same weekend that was happening. So a week later, I'm sitting at home and I'm talking to my wife, and I said, "Do you notice that we don't hear sirens?" And she said, "You know what? I do notice that." So I hopped in the car and I drove around. I didn't see a police officer anywhere. And I thought, wow, in Southeast Atlanta, I was hearing cops all the time. I was seeing them everywhere. We were hyper surveilled on the Southeast side. But as soon as I moved towards Buckhead, there wasn't as much surveillance. And when you notice, there are some communities who don't have law enforcement come out frequently, if ever. And these communities are ones that have stable housing, folks who want to work have well-paying jobs, the children go to well-resourced schools, there's no food apartheid, and you don't see police officers. And I thought, wow, that's really telling. And so coming into the domestic violence movement against patriarchal violence, I thought, there's something about community accountability that really moves me. So if you remember back during the times of the racial uprisings and defund the police was talked about quite a bit. Pew Research Center actually did a poll at the time in 2020 and found that about 25% of Americans supported defunding the police. Well, recently they submitted another study that showed, or another poll rather, that showed about 15% of the public. Now, clearly they didn't ask me, but the energy around defunding police is starting to shift as our country is starting to contract. And that concerns me, not because I'm not going to necessarily engage in the argument about whether or not to defund police, but the very fact that we don't have a lot of imagination around what could happen if a community actually took accountability for itself without law enforcement involvement. So that's what I'm really interested in, and that's what we're up to here. So I'm going to pass it on to Joyce.
Yes. Wow. Thank you to everybody who is here and listening. Karima, so much of what you've already shared, it's the why I'm here and into this work. Sounds similar. For me, I have been doing this work for about 12 years in terms of DV advocacy, as an advocate, as an activist, as part of this movement work, as part of understanding that there are so many intersections associated with domestic abuse. And I've been very intentional about making sure that I receive training in various areas because I understand that in order to do this work, that it is multifaceted, that there are a lot of moving parts and pieces. And in order to best engage the community in terms of alternative ways, then it's good for me as an advocate to explore what options are already available or lack thereof. Who's doing what in the community or lack thereof. And so I came into this work honestly from a place of harm myself, having gone through abuse and not feeling supported or very trusting when it came to who to reach out to for resources. There's a certain perception of who needs help and to what degree. And unfortunately, it tends to be dictated by your skin color, by your neighborhood. You know, to your point about the sirens, you know, we don't hear any. You know, the same is true in my situation, you know, depending on where you are, the supports aren't there. And so walking into a new life for me, again, it really came from a place of harm. It came from a place of concern that my individual needs were not being heard or met, and not taken as seriously as I needed them to be. And it was concerning to me in the beginning, it was concerning to me as an individual. The more I started doing this work, though, the more I realized that I am not unique. There are a lot of individuals who feel the same way. And I think that's one of the reasons that Walking into a New Life has been around. I started in 2010, became an official nonprofit in 2013, the beginning months of 2013. And I think part of our sustainability is not because we are very large, because we're not corporate. We don't get those corporate fundings and you know, all the federal dollars and all of that. But it's because we've not lost touch with the fact that the community has a whole slew of voices that still aren't being heard or recognized in the way that it needs to be. And so for me, I just wanted to be someone who would give people what I didn't have, even though I have a college degree, even though I'd come from a place of marriage out of my abuse, even though I was working for the county and, you know, earning a fairly decent living wage, but my job was also downsizing at the time. So in less than a year, I lost a job, I lost a marriage, I lost a home, I lost a lot of my self-esteem and self-worth, and I wasn't comfortable with talking to people. And so I had to be proactive in trying to find help and support. And then I started realizing other people needed it too. So that's honestly how I came into this work. It's why it's important to me. It's why it matters to me. It's why I have no desire necessarily to be some multi-million-dollar type of organization. Like, I want to remain that boots on the ground person where I stay in touch and connection with community. But at the same time, you know, we need funding, and that's a whole nother issue. And that's a real thing when you're looking at what alternatives may be. But I have learned to make a lot stretch with a little. And so that's, again, that's where I come from it. And that's why it's important to me, for me, and the Black and brown faces that I serve, but also all the faces that I serve. I do it because I love it. I enjoy it. I'm thankful for those who trust me in spaces that they may not trust others, the LGBT community that trust me, those that identify as transgender. Those are the individuals, those are the communities. This is why this is important, because their voices are being lost if heard at all. And that's why I do what I do. So, Kareem, I'm gonna popcorn it back to you.
Yeah. So when I think about the context for the work that we're doing, I can't help but think about the political landscape in Georgia. You know, Georgia has gotten a lot of attention over the last couple years. We're now officially a swing state. We've gotten attention for things that have been really great and things that have been really horrible. And as far as the policy work that's being done, and you know, people were really excited when Georgia, quote unquote, turned blue. But I had to remind folks, our state house is still quite red. And the laws that have been passed over the last couple of years have been deep red. And so laws have been passed that have effectively made it very difficult for folks to protest, very difficult for state agencies to decrease the budgets of law enforcement, made it very difficult for folks to seek abortion. So, or are trying to make it very difficult for folks to seek abortion. And the list goes on and on and on. So when we start talking about community-based alternatives to addressing intimate partner violence, I think that there is this general sense that, you know, our state government is making it really hard. So fear is a natural response when you are faced with the kinds of policies that make it hard to be creative and imaginative. And, you know, I'm wondering, Joyce, if you all are experiencing the same things in Tennessee in terms of that political landscape.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll share a couple of points, and then we actually have a question we want to toss out there to you all. So I will say this: here in Tennessee, we definitely see it, definitely feel it. We are very much the red state. There's no swinging to us. We are very much the red state, and you feel it and see it. And I am in the largest county in Tennessee by being in Shelby County. And we have two mayors, one's Black, one's white. So we have a city mayor, we have a county mayor. The funding and the way that supports, and I'm speaking, when I speak, I am talking about as it relates to our discussion and our time here together, as it relates to DV and those spaces. Just the treatment, the support is different in the city versus in the county. You know, I was just part of a panel discussion maybe a week and a half ago. I was invited to be part of a panel discussion that was about domestic violence, exploring opportunities within the suburban community. So it was very specific about the suburban community, and the answers and the responses and the resources that were discussed are quite different than the city of Memphis, and how it's looked at, even though, again, Memphis is predominantly Black. It's predominantly Black and brown people, but it is the suburban areas who are seeing more of the supports. And the further east Tennessee you go, the opportunities for community support and engagement, the welcoming, let me lift that, the welcoming of such things is different further east than it is in West Tennessee. Even to the point of when we talk about it from a social perspective, you know, we have a representative here who the slavery, for instance, is listed on Tennessee's Constitution. It's still included in the language. He's right here, and he is promoting leaving that language in the Constitution by referring to the language as fake history. So when you have things like that going on in the community, it makes us as individuals not be so trusting of the systems that we are supposed to be able to rely on for help and support. And so that's why this whole conversation about what can we do for alternatives, because law enforcement is not always the best alternative for us as advocates or as those who may be going through some sort of abuse, regardless to whatever the intersection may be. So one of the things that Karima and I lifted up as a question, and again, by all means, please put your comments in the chat or unmute yourself, because again, we really do want this to be an interactive conversation. So one of the things that we talked about was, what are some of the fears folks have on taking on community accountability practices? So, you know, what kind of fears are you seeing, hearing, experiencing that may prohibit you from taking on a sense of community accountability? So we'll open the chat or unmute yourselves by all means.
We and uplift what's being put in the chat. Loss of funding sources as a possible barrier for sure.
Definitely a huge one.
Trust of
Oh my
your
gosh.
community leaders, that's big, yeah.
Yes. And for me personally, that was one of the biggest ones for me, especially early on in this work, because it was community leaders that were actually trying to keep me from speaking as a survivor. As long as I would say, you know, woe is me, then I was accepted. The moment I tried to host my first program, I received an email asking me to tell them more about my plans because they didn't want me to interfere with the other things that were being done in the month of October for DV Awareness Month. So,
Wow. I just saw the request to put the question in the chat, so I'm going to do that.
and I saw someone lift up status quo. Excellent, excellent. Oh, retaliation by institutional systems and leaders. Absolutely. These are great. I mean, they are great. These are all things that we are dealing with and hearing in the South, in our area of the South. Pareto criteria for any sort of public funding. Yes, HUD processes are absolutely crazy. I lifted up earlier that I do not receive not public, but federal funding. That's part of the reason why it is so cumbersome to try to even get through those processes for the little support that you may receive.
Yeah, and you know, in Atlanta, the city council just passed the legislation that funds what we've called Cop City, that's building this huge training center for law enforcement. And I think it's really interesting. I'm watching this docu-series now on Hulu called Dope Sick. If you haven't seen it and you have access to Hulu, I highly recommend it. But one of the series highlighted a professor from Emory, go Atlanta again, who was talking about pseudo addiction. And he literally said that folks who are patients who are demonstrating symptoms of addiction actually need more medicine to combat the underlying pain. And I thought about law enforcement being asked to, being given more money and being relied on even more to address these issues that we're talking about. And it seemed illogical when I watched the show to think that if you're addicted, that the recourse is more drugs. If we're having issues with law enforcement responding, the issue cannot be more law enforcement. So I see a hand. Leona, you wanted to say something?
I do. I just wanted to attempt to answer the question, what is the fear with holding your community accountable? And so what came to my mind initially was not having total buy-in from the community as a whole, or lack of education. You know, and I say that because for me, I'm not very savvy around the politics stuff, you know. So if attempting to bring my community together to talk about the issues that affect our community, like I would really have to hone in on that political stuff because I'm not very good with it. I don't know a lot about it, you know. So just the fear of not being, here it is, the fear of not being adequate enough to begin that process with my community in which I live in.
That's a really good point, Leona. And it reminds me of growing up, we're saying now in the mid 1900s. But I grew up in a community where we literally had neighborhood watch programs. And I'm not talking about the one that took out Trayvon Martin. I'm not talking about neighborhood watch where you're outsourcing it to security officers and off-duty police officers. But truly, neighborhood watch was my across the street neighbor, Mrs. Sherman, calling my mom saying, "Hey, Charlotte, is everything okay over there? I noticed somebody was walking around your yard at night." Or Dr. Brooks down the street saying, "Hey, Charlotte, I saw Karima hanging out with her boyfriend during school hours. I'm pretty sure," that kind of thing. And when you think about organizations here in Georgia, I'm thinking specifically about Solutions Not Punishment, SNAPCO, we call them, and several other organizations that formed to create the pre-arrest diversion program, which is now Police Alternatives Diversion in Atlanta. And it takes the onus of police responding to quality of life issues and inserts this community grassroots organization in to respond when somebody is having a mental health crisis, or respond when somebody is needing an intervention with another community-based organization that's boots on the ground, not getting any government funding, but they could mount a transformative justice process for them. So, I think somebody put in the chat, and I also noticed that I'm going a little fast because I feel like our time is so limited and we have so much that we want to share. But there are so many examples of how communities intervene. How many of you all, if just by a show of thumbs up, how many of you all noticed that folks came together during the pandemic and supported one another? They didn't require a grant to help somebody who needed food. They didn't need any funding to make sure that if a tree limb fell down in Miss Johnson's driveway, that communities were going to come together and move the tree limb. I think sometimes that our impression of what's needed is sometimes way larger than what we actually need. And it stops us from movement sometimes when we get into the conversation about, or when the conversation stays super macro and not bringing it down to a basic micro. What if we had pods? I think about Vivian's story that she shared at the beginning of the hour. And my God, if she had a trusted group of folks who were a pod for her that she could call on to say, "Hey, this happened. Can you support me?" How different her experience might have been.
Yeah. And Delcia, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I do see your hand raised. We see you. So I do want to acknowledge that in these amazing responses that are also listed in the chat, because again, I can feel every one of them, can relate to them, and definitely see it in Tennessee. So I'll just kind of piggyback on what Leona and Karima have lifted up, and then by all means, Delcia, please jump in right behind me. I appreciate Leona's point about feeling a little bit inadequate, or the potential of that when it comes to policy, because that is the area that I am working on now as I have changed my curriculum up a bit with how I started walking into a new life and where it's going, so to speak, because I'm starting to see that there's a real need for more political understanding. And so I try to connect with individuals who work in that space. We have a few pop-up, we used to before the pandemic, so we're being a little more strategic, like for this, for instance, because we're doing Zoom. So we do participate in those types of things where opportunities to meet with lawmakers takes place. I am in partnership with an organization called Sister Reach. And so they host, and so I hope this is something that maybe you all consider if you're not doing it already. They host something called Black Folks Day on the Hill, where they go to Capitol Hill. In this case, it's, you know, Nashville. They go to the state capitol and they actually do pose a series of questions, and they meet with different legislators to talk about the issues that matter to us in the community. And we're able to be those voices for those individuals. So anyone is welcome to come. It's a matter of just signing up. So it's not just like advocates and activists or that kind of, it's anyone in the community that wants to come and have their questions and their voices seen and heard. And so I think that that's a wonderful thing. And you can also start doing some of that galvanizing in much smaller groups. We would have community town halls here where we would just pick a particular topic and just ask people to come, you know, and share it, because you never know who is, who's in the room, who knows what. There may be someone who's politically savvy and you just didn't know. But now that there's this opportunity, that there's voices being given, you know, here you are. And then the other piece that I wanted to say really quickly too is about community coming together and being that village. One of the things that Sister Reach started doing here, we opened it up in April, and it's called Pearl's Pantry, and it is a food and clothing resource. So we offer food, we offer clothing, we offer hygiene products, all the things that you don't necessarily think about that people need, and it's free of charge. They can get new undergarments, and I emphasize even the word new, you know, because people sometimes, it's a place where you can come where there is dignity and respect, because sometimes our service providers don't provide that to and for us, as we've heard in the plenary session, you know, beforehand, where I know my own personal experience. I went to get food stamps after I lost my job, and I have 3 children, and I'm still trying to deal with abuse and processing all of this. And the caseworker told me, I just don't think you're trying hard enough to take care of yourself. You know, and so this is a woman who looked like me, who was not, you know, so it makes it hard to trust. So it's like, okay, what things can we do? So when I started the organization, I was actually doing these pop-ups in communities. Like I would tell people, and this is before the organization even became a nonprofit. This is my claim to fame in this community, is that I would literally just start posting on Facebook, hey, I'm doing this event at this time. If you're interested in attending, you can come. When people come, they would get food, they would get clothes. We would talk about the issues that were important to them. They would leave with self-care bags. We would do reflexology or manicures and pedicures, or massages or yoga, or things that would be community oriented, that would help individuals to feel good about themselves. And someone on Facebook asked me why I didn't never become a nonprofit. I told them I didn't have the money, and that's not why I'm doing this. Like, I just want to help people in the ways that I needed help and support. And she says, well, I'm going to send you something to at least help you with your next project. You all, she sent me enough money to pay the IRS for my designation to start the nonprofit. And she says, I don't have a lot of money, but I'm retired and I have a little bit, and I try to give it to people who are actually out doing the work. And I see that you're doing the work. This lady lives in Miami. I live in Memphis. We have never met. We finally have at least connected on Facebook, and I see her face and she sees mine. But I'm saying that to say, to Leona's point, that just because you may not be politically savvy, or someone in the community may not be taking up the mantle to help community, then you be that person and start and be that one, because you never know who you're reaching out to. Again, this lady was not looking for any supports from me, but she had the means to help me to be able to help the village in the area that I live in. And that matters. Delcia, turn it over to you.
Sophia Molina, are you still with us? Your hand is still raised. Oh, there you are.
Ok, hola a todos, Dilcia Molina. Quiero asegurarme que me están escuchando en el idioma dominante. Quiero asegurarme que están escuchando intérpretes, que están escuchando ellas en inglés.
I just want to make sure that you can hear me in the dominant language that we have, and you can hear me in the English language.
Molina, does not seem to be an interpreter.
I'm sorry, Karina.
Whoop. I just want to remind everybody to have the English channel on if you are not bilingual. So you can select your channel at the bottom of your screen with a little globe icon. And if you select the English channel, then we can have a multilingual space.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, listamos.
¿Estoy lista?
Ready?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for allowing me to present in my language. I really appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. So in first place, I would really like to comment to you that us here in Virginia, we have experienced a really beautiful community experience, grassroots experience. From COVID, we had the opportunity to be able to come together with women on WhatsApp. There's a phone application on smartphones. And we have been able to do, during this whole entire time during COVID, rapid response and mutual aid. And this is something that has allowed us to be connected with women and being able to signal them or let them know of where they're sharing food and even where their police checkpoints or where ICE and immigration is. And this for us has been so important because I want to connect this with what you were asking previously, Ms. Joyce, and also one of the biggest horrible fears in our communities and us as leaders, we have this compromise, this ethical commitment with our communities when we tell a woman to give up any form of violence, gender violence, right? Because when we talk about the institutions like police, the police never answers our needs, the needs that we really have. So what happens many times in Virginia is an expert at that. The police will call immigration. And when the immigration officials come to our house or to the apartment building of the survivor, they don't take the abuser. They'll take 7 or 8 other Latinx people or workers who don't have documentation, and they end up being deported. And so that's a problem that we're trying to deal with as community leaders, because we're in this ethical, political situation of really being able to serve immigrant communities, because at the end of the day, we're not solving anything in terms of domestic violence. And they take 7 of our comrades and community people to be deported into immigration. And so I think that we still have a lot to do as far as dealing with these types of things and being able to implement the laws. When they say law enforcement, it's not enough. It's very pejorative. Instead of solving the gender-based knowledge and the complexities, it affects the human rights of immigrant communities, of communities of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities, and populations of color. Thank you so much for the opportunity to express myself.
That was beautiful, Dulcia. That was beautiful. And that was a perfect example of what we mean by examples of communities coming in and standing in the gap with each other. COVID magnified many things, many inequities, but the one thing that I will say that was beautiful about COVID, if there were any bright spots, was that communities came together. They found ways to support one another. I wanted to also just lift up a question that was in the chat from Fran, asking about examples of communities where traditional and non-traditional programs are working well together. Joyce says there are a few in Memphis. There's one, GCADV actually, we were reading the book by Beth Ritchie called Arrested Justice. And after that, I started talking to my colleagues about ways that we could partner in working together on some transformative solutions for communities. And we started a partnership The coalition is called the Georgia Collective for Transformative Solutions, and it's a coalition of community-based grassroots organizations and larger 501c3s. And we've come together to research what's happening in communities, research what communities are doing the work. So we know of several religious communities that take on the work of addressing intimate partner violence within their communities, and they don't call law enforcement. We have examples of, I remember back in the 80s when the missing and murdered children was happening. And there was a community that lived in one of the housing projects that took it on themselves to protect their children. They were called the Bat Brigade for reasons that I'm sure you can you can understand. But they took it upon themselves to protect the children in the community, and they didn't involve law enforcement. So we have examples. We just need to fill them out and find them and then share those resources.
And I would add to that, as Kareem and I were talking about this prior to today's session, and just as they have a couple of different things that they're doing that are in place, I feel just the opposite here. And I wanted to lift that point up, that we've had a couple of different initiatives that have, started to take shape, but took on a different life. I think some ways domestic violence kind of got lost in the discussion. So even though violent crime has been lifted, not necessarily through the lens of DV, even though it has been identified on more than one occasion that gang violence followed by domestic violence are the two biggest violences in our community. And yet I still feel, and collectively, we still feel that our voices are lost. So to Kareema's point of just seeking out those alternative places and spaces, I am very honest with people and say that I don't always tell people to go to the police first. And I work in spaces where some of the individuals that I work with are kind of that, for lack of a better word, the Harriet Tubmans, if you will, where this person has got to get out of town. This person needs to relocate. And so they may work overnight trying to ensure that that happens, but they may reach out to me and say, hey, I know that your organization is connected to food or to clothing or to those hygiene products, and, trying to help pack a bag. I've got backpacks, I'm literally looking at them. I have backpacks that we can put in, things in, so that we work together as a community and really make sure that that person is safe. One of the things that we have taken on specifically is relocation. And that's why I mention that, is because sometimes the best and safest thing for a person to do is to leave the environment that they're in, leave it all together. And so we look at, okay, is there a bus ticket available? Is there a plane ticket available? What resources may be available in a different community that would be more serviceable for that particular client, versus trying to have them stay in this space because we just want to help them and we want those numbers. And we've lost the sense of community in that the priority is about the numbers and not necessarily about the individual. So I think that it's necessary to look at it from a lens of community, saying that, okay, I might not have the resources to help in this space, but if I can connect to a Harriet Tubman, who is able to get this person out of here, but I know I have a connection with Greyhound bus system that may be able to put them on the bus. And we work together in that space, then it's those types of things that will actually be helpful and beneficial, and that we are being the collective village that we have set out to be. Because again, ultimately, it's got to be the community. We've got to be the community. We've got to be the police. I can visualize the Bat Police and what that is, but it is what it is. You know, we called them big brothers and sisters and uncles, you know, that's what we called them back in the day. So whatever that is and whatever that looks like. But yeah, for us, that has been helpful. Everyone having these, like I said, having these small little interactive groups with one another to find out who has what strengths and where they may be challenged. And then us coming together and creating our own mini internal resource list. So there's this big resource list, and then there's the list within the list. And the list within the list is actually where the meat and the heart of being able to help people who are being victimized to be able to find those safe spaces and us come together as a community and do the work.
Nana, is that how we say your name? Is it Nana or Nana?
It's Nana. Thank you. I love what you just said, about the list within the list. You know, and sometimes to do that, that really resonated. But I wanted to piggyback on some stuff you had mentioned earlier about not, you know, being political or not knowing the right words or saying anything like that. I don't consider myself to be a political person. My dad's into politics, I'm not. But what I found of really trying to hold the community account, you know, the community accountability piece, I also want to get those people that are in leadership positions that have been elected to hear what we need. So what I recently started doing in these past few months is going to council meetings, whether I live in Southeast Louisiana, not in a big city or anything like that, mostly rural, close to New Orleans, but we don't have the resources like Joyce, you were talking about, that other places might have, or more affluent communities. We have limited resources. So I find myself attending those meetings, listening. You get to find out different people who are maybe advocates, activists of their own in the community that you can link up and partner with. So that's been helpful. But as well, I, you know, had opportunity to go to the podium and make my voice to be heard about our issues. Some stuff when they're talking about law enforcement and a lot of things that they, you know, people were being very critical of law enforcement in our area. You know, hearing that, getting different perspectives, but also when I said, like, had an opportunity to talk about our service with domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims, then the chief of police was there, was like, hey, I didn't know about y'all, even though we've been around since 1982. So it helped to build further connections. And even though I may not say the right things, I just, you know, ask my higher power to give me the right words to say and to connect with people that I need to connect. But it's helped me with those officials who we can say when they need to go or when they need to stay in their office, right? To hold them, their feet to the fire, because they play a role in this too. Mayors, council, men and women, whoever they may be, they play a role in this too. It's just not us as advocates. If they really want to make our community safer, they need to do something. So just me being present, speaking when I feel appropriate, making those connections, I think that's been helpful for me, because I've had people come out and I'm just walking around on a Saturday and they said, hey, I saw you at that meeting. What can I do to help? I want to help you all out. Or do you have this? I know a survivor. So I would just encourage people, even if they are timid, to just go or go with somebody else. You can write down your thoughts and have that and share. So that's all I wanted to say.
That's an excellent point. Being in the room where it happens, that's important. You know, I think a lot of folks don't realize that issues that they think affect the general public, well, we're a part of the general public. So these issues impact us directly. And another thing I wanted to just add is, when you think, for those of us who belong to organizations that have larger budgets than, say, a grassroots organization, what are some of the things that we can do to give voice to those who are marginalized, give a platform to those who wouldn't necessarily have a platform? What are the ways that we can pivot in our organizations? For example, GCADV made a very big pivot last year when we decided that we weren't going to support any policies that had carceral solutions. So we are completely non-carceral in our solutions now. And that was a major pivot. And that meant having really hard conversations with some of our standard community partners about what's carceral and what's not carceral. Can you fund another organization or project that we run out of GCADV is, and I think V mentioned this in her panel discussion, is the Community Rise program, where we identified those community-based organizations that are doing this work, and we provide support and resources so that they can continue to do the work and grow in their work. There are lots of ways that we can be in the room where it happens, provide a room where it can happen. You know, there are lots of ways that we can engage in this work.
And I just want to say thank you, because I know our time is almost up. So Karima, I'm gonna leave it for you for any last comments, but I just want to thank everyone who came and took the time to listen to us, to share your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns in what I consider not just a safe space, but a brave space. I saw that someone did have their hand up. I think it was
Monica.
Monica, yes, yes. So
yes,
that's, if she's still interested.
Monica.
Okay, then I am done. Thank you so much. I'll share whatever thoughts I might have in the chat. Kareem, I'm gonna leave it to you, Monica, and whomever in this last few minutes.
Did you want to go ahead and ask your question or make your comment?
It was just going to be a comment. This has been a great space and a great conversation in a lot of different areas and what it led down. And to the young lady who just spoke before, that's exactly where I started, attending those city council meetings. There's funding coming into our neighborhood. We have the American Rescue Plan Act coming into our neighborhoods now, into our communities. How are they spending that money? What areas do they need to focus those monies on? And those are conversations that we need to start having and look at the barriers within our community, because we are there in that community, and educating them on, okay, no, this is what our community needs. I'm in North Carolina and I work with several agencies, but the leading agency is really the boots on the ground, their homeless shelter, and they run those conversations into housing. Why don't we have affordable housing? What is that looking like in this area? This is leading to we have the attorneys and the lawyers who are doing eviction court. So we're addressing those barriers so that victims could quickly find housing. Where is this funding going so that we can bring it to our community, so that we can have those conversations, and attending those meetings and knowing who that are. Even if you don't know the language, you're going to learn the language, and you're going to learn, okay, bringing it to this person and what that looks like. So yeah, absolutely. Going to those meetings and just sitting there and taking notes. That's literally where I started making a difference within the community that I'm in.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it made me remember another thing: talk to your DAs, build relationships with them, have them come to you as experts on the subject, and talk to them about the needs of survivors. And we can't litigate our way out of this. So we've got to come up with better solutions that are community-based to address the issues. Yeah. So it looks like folks are coming back soon. I want to just echo Joyce. It's been a pleasure talking to you in this space and being with you in this space. And clearly there is a need for a larger conversation and a longer conversation about this. But, you know, it was really nice to even just peruse the chat and see all the incredible resources that folks were sharing, and great questions that were being asked and answered. It's been lovely.